Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please now welcome Sean Foster, President of Crowdtap.
Good morning. Good morning. It's cold and it's early, so thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time talking about Crowdtap, and more importantly, why does Crowdtap exist and what do we do? And I think it's going to play into probably some broad themes that you've been hearing, certainly yesterday, and you'll hear more about today. A little bit about me. So I've spent 25 years in consumer marketing, big companies and small companies, places like Weight Watchers, the Gilt Group, Avon Products. I joined Crowdtap about a year and a half ago because about 5 years ago I started to see what I thought then was the beginning of a pretty significant shift in the way brand marketing would work. So let's talk a little bit first about Crowdtap. So Crowdtap is a brand innovation and engagement platform. And what we do is we take crowds of people, everyday people, and brands, and we bring them together through software, essentially, through technology, to build what we call people-powered marketing, which is essentially to change the dynamic and the operating model of brand marketing in such a way that people are the base of everything that a brand does. And why that's important is some of these shifts in the landscape that I'll talk about in just a moment. So certainly what's happening around us is that the operating model for brand marketing is shifting. So how is it that a company like Dollar Shave Club can compete with a behemoth like Gillette? It's certainly not by doing the same things that Gillette did to build that incredible brand. It's about doing things fundamentally different. And so this shift in the operating model a lot of times is discussed as a problem with advertising. And certainly there are issues with the way advertising works right now. But fundamentally, the issue is the relationship between people and brands and how completely broken that relationship is. It became very noticeable really with the rise of social media, and I think a lot of times we misinterpreted what was going on. So we started to see shifting behaviors and patterns, right? Really what was going on was that fundamentally people's attitudes and behaviors about brands and about advertising more generally were shifting pretty significantly. And that's manifests itself in what we're now seeing in the performance of advertising, and in particular, sort of the broadcast display advertising model, and really a breakdown of what has been the long-standing model that we've all used. So where do we go from here? Well, it's important to understand that if we don't, as brands, as agencies, as people in this business, make some very fundamental shifts, we're going to put our business models at significant risk. And we're seeing that in the market right now. We're seeing the way that brands are being built, and they're being built very differently. So just some quick data on how to think about some of these shifts. So if you think about millennials and the generation behind millennials, these behaviors and these attitudes are very, very different than prior generations. One of the things that I think is broken is the sort of the historical model of, hey, I'm willing to pay for content through some form of advertising that may or may not have relevance for me. That model is fundamentally broken. And so if you talk to millennials, less than 1% say that ads build brand trust. And this has been forever the primary vehicle through which we have built brand trust. They're not really responding to ads in the way they used to anymore. And more than that, we're training them to be ad blockers, right? Ad avoiders. It's really interesting to see the behaviors that have developed. And interestingly, if you look at the pace of innovation around technology with advertising, the pace of ad blocking technology has far outstripped the pace of better ads, right? Ads that people want to see. And it's a pretty big symptom of a greater problem. However, this actually presents really interesting opportunities for us if we're willing to make big investments, big shifts in the way we're going to market. So the interesting thing about millennials is they pretty much hate and don't trust advertising generally, but they actually like brands more than prior generations. And also interestingly, if you ask millennials, more than 50% will tell you that they now feel like they have the ability to impact the success or failure of a brand. It's pretty staggering to think about this generation that is digitally native, that now knows that they have power in a relationship where they never had power before, right? Because the way the broadcast model worked was I go away, I spend a bunch of money, I come up with ads, and then I just sort of spread those ads out wherever I can, and a little bit of hope for the best. Now what's happening is that this generation, millennials and the generation behind them, are all content creators and consumers of user-generated content. And what they now know is that through social media in particular, they have a platform to change the way that brands operate. And so the opportunity is to really sort of tap into that, right? And to tap into these new behaviors because they do care about brands, they want to participate, they're creating a tremendous amount of content, and they're consuming a tremendous amount of content. And what's interesting about that is the way they're consuming this content now is obviously through others. And it doesn't have to be just close friends or relatives, but it's people that they see as genuine and authentic and trustworthy. And advertising has continued to go kind of the opposite path of that. So what Crowdtap is focused on is trying to create an opportunity for brands to operationalize that opportunity. And it's really about thinking about a new operating model. And the way we think about Crowdtap is sort of an operating system for open brands. And really, I think that's another one of the huge shifts that's taking place. And whether we want to accept it or recognize it, it's really what's happening. So if you think of an analogy to software, in the old software model, a big software company would create software, they'd slap it on a disk, they'd shrink wrap it, and they'd put it on the shelf. And that was as close as you'd ever get to that operating model, to that code. Now software is all about how open is the software, how extensible is the code, how many developers do you have on the platform. Brand marketing is shifting in the same way. So where historically we used a closed ecosystem of hiring agencies and buying ads and really pushing out to consumers, now we're in an operating model where brands become very open. And it's a little bit scary because what are people going to say about our brands? And what kind of experiences are we going to create to drive them? Because right now what we're doing is pissing people off with advertising they don't want and don't like. So how do we think about reframing that with a new operating system? So I think we've all seen this data probably a little too much, but what we're seeing is this rise of ad blocking, right? We're seeing the reasons behind that behavior is that these ads have really lost relevance, they're disruptive, but again, fundamentally what's happening is people are rejecting the model. So it's really important then to find a solution that's about a new model, not about a better ad. And that's really, I think, in a large part about creating new experiences, right? And investing in people, not investing in broadcast advertising. So how does that dynamic need to change? So again, I think the key here is to think about it as an operating model change. So the first important change, I think, for any brand marketer to make is this philosophical shift that people are now your partners. So they're not the consumer of your advertising. Let's stop using the word consumer. It speaks to really a bad relationship, a disingenuous relationship where we don't really care and invest in people. We just hope they're going to respond to our ads and buy our stuff. So the first is this philosophical shift. People are now co-architects of the brand with me, and we're going to create this brand together. And I'm going to care as much about what these people care about as what I want them to care about when I create advertising. The next key piece is an operational shift. And this is fundamentally changing the tools, the resources, the investments that we use to make this happen. So I think a lot of times the question comes into play, well, where does technology fit into this equation, right? How do I use technology? How do I systematize technology? It's in this place that we think about that. And again, this is the concept of an operating system. What are we using to power our efforts? And really this, I think, becomes the two key pieces, people and technology. Technology will create brands in a more effective and more efficient way. And so it's really about reallocating dollars into this new system that will allow us to create these efficiencies to be able to compete in a way that we can't with the historical model. The upstart brands, the new brands that are using these methodologies are going to win because they have a more efficient and effective model. If we're still stuck with the kind of capitalization model and the economics around these old ways of going to market, we're not going to be able to compete. And then there's this sort of strategic shift, which is, again, building this people-first approach, which can be absolutely frightening and scary, right? Because as brand managers, we're taught to be kind of the police of the brand, right? We have to control it tightly. The message has to be controlled. The problem with that is you can't control the message anymore. The only way you can control the message is if you try to co-author it with people, because they are going to be saying what they are going to say based on the experiences they have with brands, and now they have a platform at scale. So if we don't invest in people and really make that commitment clear to them, then we're still going to be at their mercy, right? And so we need to figure out a way to partner and become co-authors of brands. And then really a tactical shift, right? Which is we need to get away from the sort of the flighting of what we do, this sort of on and off approach to marketing to consumers, right? Because your relationship with people doesn't stop when the ad stops running. You have to figure out a way to make investments in people and not just keep buying ads. I'll give you an example of this. When I was at Weight Watchers, we were a really bad example of this, right? So for most of the year, we did very little advertising, and then come January 1st, which is New Year's resolution week, we spent a ton of money on advertising. Now, the funny part about that is it's a message of we're here for you, we're going to help you, we're a nurturing and caring company. But guess what? From this time of sort of October, November through the end of December, when you're at your most vulnerable moment because of the holidays and you really need Weight Watchers is nowhere to be found because we know the register's not going to ring because no one starts a diet right before Christmas. So January comes around and we go, oh, we're here for you. Isn't this great? But isn't that so disingenuous and so transparent now? And the answer is yes. And now people have a platform to respond to that kind of behavior. Going forward, what we need to do is to continue that investment always always on, all the time, making investments in people and working with them. And that could be as simple as gathering insights, innovating products, doing reviews, all sorts of things. But it's really important that we do that on an ongoing basis. Now, I want to share some examples of brands that have, I think, done a nice job of tapping into some of these opportunities, and I'll share some Crowdtap case studies as well. So I think everybody at this point is pretty familiar with what Doritos has done to try to sort of tap into this creator culture. Now, they've even moved beyond the crash the Super Bowl, which they've done for a number of years now, which was a way to have people help define what their advertising messaging should be. They're now extending that program across sort of all their marketing efforts. Another important concept, I think, that sort of underlines all of this is something that the Harvard Business Review talked about in the last couple of months, which is this notion of crowd culture. And I think this is really important because, again, if you come back to this idea that what's happening now is that people have always been passionate about topics and interests and categories, but what's happened now is that's accelerated, and social has allowed people to kind of collect around trends and ideas. And so this notion of crowd culture is about, can you build a brand by finding some of those opportunities and finding some of those people, and then thinking about the construction of your brand relative to those things that they're interested in, sort of their worldviews, and then really tailor what you do around that and finding those opportunities to create those storytellers to take your message to the next level. So you've got folks like Old Spice kind of tapped into the sort of the Williamsburg kind of bro and found a way to be kind of trendy and hipster with really what was sort of an old and stodgy brand. Or Under Armour that found a way to tap into this notion of female power and empowerment, and really take those groups of people that are passionate about these ideas and help create your brand around those ideas rather than trying to create the ideas to get those people to come into. So a couple of examples of folks that we've been working with that I think have done a really nice job of rethinking the entire framework of what they're doing. One is Absolute. So Absolute, obviously an iconic brand if you think back to the bottle print ads. So they're trying to sort of move away from liquid in a bottle to this idea of tapping into nightlife and sort of the culture around nightlife. So with Absolute and working with Absolute Labs, we shipped out 6,000 Google Cardboard VR headsets. And Absolute put on a performance in Brooklyn, and we simulcast that through the VR headsets all across the country with these 6,000 people. And those folks, and then in turn, shared content messaging around that event through their social networks. We had a tune-in length of over 17 minutes. And the kind of the halo effect post-event was unbelievable as we looked at all of the engagements and the activity around that event. Another good example, Ricola. I think everybody probably is familiar with some of the television advertising and the yodeling and the mountain pipes and all of that. But what they were able to do was to really find pockets of people who felt really strongly about all natural ingredients and sort of coming back to a more familiar and traditional place. And so we were able to put together a crowd of about 21,000 people who generated a tremendous amount of user-generated content. And what's interesting about this is that we then were able to track back to sales lift, and this is one of the most successful things they've ever done, generated about 10% sales lift. Whirlpool, another interesting example. So think about what is sometimes called a cold metal category, really hard to drive kind of emotional activity around this category. And so what we did is we really focused on everyday moments, and really a lot of everyday moments with mom. And again, the idea here is to focus in on experiences. And so we generated a lot of content around mom's everyday lives. And so why does that become relevant? Well, because if you think about their social graphs, people in their networks are going to respond very strongly to those similar kinds of experiences that they're having. So this content that was generated was very small individual moments and experiences to some very, very strong viral content that involved children, and it was very funny, but something that resonated super strongly because it came from moments of truth instead of trying to invent moments of truth. And so what we saw was really interesting, a sort of a 6 times lift in sentiment in a category that's very, very difficult to move, and almost a 7% sales lift as well. So what we're seeing more and more is that the activity has both a short-term impact, which we're all interested in, right? Because we've all got quarterly numbers to make. But more importantly, what we're doing is we're making an investment in the future, right? Ads are temporal. They come and they go. People will be here for forever, right? As long as we continue to engage them. And so you're getting this immediate benefit, and we can see that in the numbers, but more importantly, we're creating these long-term relationships that we're going to grow value from. So we're actually making investments rather than just buying ads. And speaking of that, in measurement, I think we're finally starting to see really good progress on accountability, right? And the thinking around how do we measure this activity in precise ways that both demonstrate the immediate impact that we can have to a business, but then also the longer-term opportunity and value creation from investing in these relationships. And so you'll see here a number of organizations who you guys are all familiar with have made a lot of good progress of late in creating a standardized set of metrics to measure some of this word-of-mouth activity and this sort of social engagement that's created through generation after generation of sharing. Have made some really good progress. But I think more importantly, we also want to start thinking more about how to measure this long-term brand impact, right? That additional value that we're creating beyond an impression. And that's one of the things I think that is really hard about making this shift is, again, if we're thinking about it as a model shift, we have to rethink the economics of what we're doing as well, right? We've all established these kind of clear causal relationships that we believe between the ads we buy, the things that we do, and the impact that they could have on share or sales. But I think what we're going to have to do is rethink that model in very fundamental ways and move beyond that very short-term based view of the world to think about much longer-term value metrics. And I have 20 seconds left, so I don't think I have time for questions. But thank you very much for joining us this morning, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you.